Hey, everybody, welcome to the writing room. I'm Bob Goff, and we have the lovely Kimberly here.
Hi, I'm so
Hi.
glad to be here. This is so fun in the new studio.
Totally. And my buddy Kim Stuart and I have been hosting this together, and we want to invite you into this idea. For some of you, you've been thinking about writing, you just haven't gotten to it. Some of you are like immersed in this stuff. So we thought we would talk today about this idea of how do you get started with writing? What was the beginning of your adventure, Kim?
Oh, well, I was desperate. It was a desperation beginning. I did not plan to do this as a job. In fact, I was a high school teacher, an ESL teacher. I loved it a million years ago.
Didn't you teach Spanish too?
I did.
Sí.
Sí, qué bueno. Exactly. That was good. You would have gotten an A. Actually, most of my students really wanted to know how to say, where's the bathroom and beer, just the word beer. So, high school, that's kind of where they were thinking. So I loved that job. And then we started our family, and I was home with Anna, who was a lovely newborn, but not very communicative at the time because she was 5 days old. And so I realized I'd gone from a fairly extroverted situation to just being at home with her, which I loved. But when Mark would come home, I would attack him with questions. Most of the questions were, tell me every single conversation you had today. Replay it, all of it. Mark was in dental school, and so his conversations were really lame. Didn't matter. Wanted all of them. Tell me about the flossing guy.
Just more
words. And so he was the one who was frightened at the change in his wife and said, you've always mentioned you like to write. How about a hobby? So my road to this was really just trying to tap into a part of me that probably was there from the beginning. I'm a firstborn female. I never in my life would have said, I want to be a writer growing up because I didn't know any. And it seemed ridiculous, right? Like I want to tap dance on Broadway or something. So I think for me, I wasn't even thinking when I started, I'm going to write a book. I just wanted to try it and see what would happen, really for my own head and heart. How did you start?
Yeah, it was, I was a lawyer by trade, and actually really enjoyed being a lawyer. Yeah. And then we had started Love Does and wanted to build schools and all that. And a publisher, Thomas Nelson, said, if you write a book, we'll help you build your first school. And it sounded like a great deal. So I'm like, I'm in. And so I just started writing down stories. And so for people that are listening, sometimes you can just break it down a little bit. Instead of writing a book, which sounds very ominous for somebody like me who could barely spell cat, when I broke it down to just saying, write my stories down, and for those that have been listening for a while, about 90 short stories, 500, 600 word stories is what would go into a book like Love Does or Everybody Always. So that just kind of appeals to people. They have a few minutes to read something uplifting. Yeah. Jesus always told stories when he was talking to his friends. And so I thought, what if we tell a story with a purpose? Some people will do a longer form, like you wrote fiction. So speak to that for a moment. That's a longer arc. You actually have to know where you're going with this.
Yeah, I didn't. No, I had no idea what I was doing. In fact, I think of that now and think, couldn't I have Googled or something? I didn't. I really wrote into not only the desperation move of trying to find some things that maybe had lain dormant in my head and in my heart. I also was looking for the book that I wanted to read and could not find it. So this was, 17, 18 years ago. And I would go to the bookstore and try to find funny, smart novels that maybe had some faith infusion, but that weren't sermons. And I couldn't find any. All the faith books were really preachy, like the novels. There was always a Damascus moment where the main character would fall weeping. And sometimes that happens, but in my life, that has not been the case. And then the other books that were maybe in my time of life or kind of the space that I was looking, they were just really naughty, and I wasn't into that either. So I really honestly came from a place of, well, I'll just write a book for my friends. I want to write a book that's not out there yet. And I think a lot of the people that you and I talk to come from that place. I just haven't seen it yet, so I guess I'll write it. And it's both really ridiculous and really beautiful, because lots of great things come out of that gap on the shelf.
Yeah, you need to know who you're writing to and why you're writing in the first place. So if you have clarity on that. So sometimes you can get a prompt by finding a book that you identify with, it, the last lecture or whatever, War and Peace. But find a book that you like a lot, and then to say, what if I write into, I'm not trying to recreate that book, but there was something that resonated with you in the cadence of the book or the content. We've spoken a lot about rise and run on stairs. So 7.5-inch rise, 11-foot tread, 7.5-inch rise, 11-foot tread. So there's a cadence to that book that appealed to you that you read. And so can you replicate that kind of a cadence? And so for some of you, it will be just collecting stories. I was laughing with you and some friends here about swapping cars with my son this morning. And he jumped in mine and the tank was full. That's what people do. I jumped in his. Oh my gosh, you could throw a book of matches in the tank and not get a flicker. It was bone dry. And so $107 later, I'm thinking, I have a 30-year-old, like pretty high functioning kid. And I don't think he was confused about that. I think that's brilliant. So what I want you to do is think about, not trying to say a fork and life is like a fork, but you could say, made me immediately think that, and people are transitioning and trying to figure out this balance between work and home, that if you come home and your tank is empty, so maybe you onboard an idea with a funny little vignette, one, me, my, or I, and then immediately transition to we, us, and our. We all know what it's like to pull home and be whatever. Then you can, in your first draft, just get the words, get the general thing. And then as you do the following drafts, you can make it a little bit more poignant, a little bit more refined. But the first time, just get it in the zip code. Is that what you do with your writing?
Yeah, for sure. The rough draft is just hilariously horrible. And still is years into this. The first draft is never something that anyone will see, including my blood relation. Only some of whom actually read my books. You know who you are. But when I was starting, absolutely, I did not even have that clue. I didn't even know write a horrible first draft. I was just kind of tinkering. And for me, what pushed out of tinkering into doing and getting done was a deadline. I met someone who was interested in the book. I went to a writer's conference and she said, send it to me when you're done. Put my name on the cover letter so we don't throw it in the recycling bin, and send it to this publishing house. And for me, that was what got wheels on the train. So you might not have a publisher in your living room or in your sphere right now, but I bet you have somebody who will hold your feet to the fire. And so sometimes just having someone say, okay, I want this by December 1st. It can even be someone who's not, even going to read the book. Just having, the person in your life who will get bossy with you and who loves you and who will make you do that. That for me, that's all I needed, was to have somebody standing over me saying, no, really, I want it by this time. That got it done.
Yeah. And think through, again, life events that are happening as you're collecting what we refer to on this podcast as packets, which is shorthand for about a 500 or 600 word story. Don't wring your hands and think, should I put that in the book? Should I not?
Right.
What if you just say what happened and then you can decide later? Sweet Maria took a little spill this weekend, and we are all Team Goff. It seems like it's a high value to not be needy. And yet here was a time where actually kind of needy, because the people I know who I'm writing to, who's in the chair, I immediately thought of a disciple that Jesus knelt down to wash his feet, and he immediately said no. And the disciple was trying to be not needy. He's like, oh, no, heavens, no. And Jesus said, unless I wash your feet, you're not actually part of me. So what it made me think is to just riff on that. Again, I'll decide later, is it something that goes in? I'll decide later how to make it more poignant. But I want to net the butterfly when it comes by. I want to say there's a connection between this and this. I want to capture that. And then a little bit later, you'll do a better job. So just bad words are catnip for better words. And if you keep that in mind, then what you can do is make progress. So tell me the best and worst parts about being an author. Like you coach so many people as up and coming authors. Tell us the best and worst of it.
The best is knowing that some idea that percolated for a while in my head or in my heart makes sense to somebody else when they come back and talk to me about it. It's just the best. That's the best.
Oh, yeah,
just
I like that.
Yeah, having someone react and say, "Oh, I totally get this." Isn't that the sweetest thing for you too?
Oh, well, yeah, I remember being so pumped up. This guy said, "Guy, I read your book. It changed my life. And I've actually made a 360-degree shift." And I'm like, "You're actually right back where you started, buddy." 180 is okay. 360, like not so much. It just joined me. The worst part about the scary part for some people who are thinking about authoring, not a word, is the vulnerability that comes with it. And it'll actually cause you to access some things that really ought to be accessed.
Yeah, that's the truth. It requires a certain amount of courage.
Yeah. Do you ever have regrets in your writing when you get something out there?
Once it's out and in print, I'm a ninny about reading reviews. I don't read them. So I probably have regrets. I just haven't read them yet. Typically by the time, you live with a book for so long that by the time it gets out there, you almost have to reread it because it takes so long for it to get from your head to the page. I'd say my regrets for myself in the beginning part of the writing and the career of writing is that I just was really hard on myself. I expected myself to know all the things, do them all well, get it out there, sell a gazillion copies, and have my hair done by 5. And that just it's not super kind to me. So if I could go back and talk to that younger Kim, I would say, listen, slow your roll a little bit. This is going to be a learning process and you're not going to nail it. And there's some beauty in the not nailing it too. That's my regret.
Yeah, I think for me, the regret is to not capture an idea when it comes floating by. We've all experienced this, a moment where you had a great idea. You're like, oh, that's actually what it's like. You could think of a more complex idea like codependency, if that was by way of example. And then you could analogize that to going to the grocery store and then having somebody get all their picks and then put it in the conveyor belt. And then there's all your stuff, and there's that little plastic divider that separates your stuff from their stuff. So codependency means removing the plastic divider.
That's good.
You're stuck with all their bad food choices. You're pounding Cheetos. You feel bad. So find simpler ways to describe more in-depth thing, and then don't. If you're writing about faith, think, well, what would John Piper say about that? I don't care. What I do is I want to be accurate to what the scriptures have to say, but I'm not going to get wrapped around the axle.
Right.
I'm just a dude. And Jesus, that isn't going loose on doctrine, just going so big on Jesus that that in a subsequent pass, I can make sure that I'm not just tickling people's ears, which Paul said don't do. But I'm speaking actually truthfully. And I try to make sure I'm not talking about the guy I wish I was, but the guy that I already am. So does that make sense?
That's big. Yep.
Yeah. Do you have trouble with that sometimes to say you want to be for good reasons? You're not trying to pump yourself up, but you're like thinking aspirationally,
right,
as if you had already accomplished that rather than saying, gosh, I got questions. I'm trying to sort this stuff out.
So much more winsome, right? If we just put John will be John Piper and Kim must be Kim. And if I try to be John, everyone sees through it. And actually, it's not very engaging. It doesn't ask people to come sit down with you. Also, you're lying. So it's very off-putting to read words that you think, I'm not sure if she's there. And even if nobody knows it but you, somehow that comes through. That lack of honesty will come through. And Bob, when you were talking about netting those ideas and having regrets that maybe you didn't write them all down, that is a number one, I think. You can look later and decide whether or not that was really as awesome as you thought it was at 3 a.m., but you can't know that if you didn't write it down. And I have a better feeling about myself than is actual reality in terms of how much I'll remember. I don't. Last night, my flight was delayed. I got in really late. I was trying to fall asleep. My brain was a little too busy. And I had an idea that I thought, oh, this is going to fix something in a chapter, or this is going to fix something in a speaking thing I have coming up. So I warred with myself that I will remember. This is a wonderful idea. Surely it will be wonderful in the morning. But because I know myself, I knew A, I will not remember, and B, it might not be wonderful. But just in case it is, turned on the hotel light, wrote it down, or actually sent myself an email, which is a trick you have taught me. And then I went to sleep. And I think there's something really important about just stopping. That can take 20 seconds, and it could be a chapter or a paragraph, or really just something that teaches you again tomorrow. But if you don't write it down, it's goner.
Yeah. And a final thought on that, when you do write down your thoughts, sometimes it's easy to commingle your thoughts with somebody else's thoughts. So just be really mindful of this idea of attribution, that if you are, something appeals to you, just double check that was your stuff, not their stuff by accident. It's innocent, but it can be something that is a big reversal for you. So just double, triple check that you go like, this is Portia Nelson. It was her poem. But I thought it was nifty. If you don't know, where did that come from? I wonder if that's one. Then you can say, I remember hearing from somebody and I can't remember who it was. That would be better than just claiming as your own. And it's usually an innocent mistake, but just be mindful. If you can nab the idea, then write down who that's from. I use the word quote, like Quote, if that's how you spell it. And that, which is a big flag. This is somebody else's idea. So I don't mix their stuff with my stuff.
Right. People are very gracious about that, particularly if you say quote, or I think I heard this somewhere. But write it down before you forget, no matter whose it is. And I think when you're talking about that in terms of scripture, you do this so beautifully. And I'm always pushing to do this. When you say, earlier you referenced the story about Jesus washing the feet of a disciple. That is such an engaging story, and it's a familiar story. And so I think what you do so well, and what I try to do, is to take those familiar ideas that weren't yours to begin with and continually brush dust off of them and really work for inventive language and fresh language. For people who are familiar with that story, they'll get it, but they'll hear it differently. So instead of just going straight in, I see this sometimes in submissions of kind of early drafts, people just plunk a bunch of just a quotation, either of another person or a Bible story. And that's okay, but I think it's better to really engage with the story and reword and help kind of take a couple of the layers off, and to build an on ramp to that. So you're not just plopping in a whole paragraph from Matthew. Instead, you're engaging with it as a reader and as a person. Then your reader can engage as well.
Yeah, and this is actually a perfect segue to the next time you and I are together. And we're going to do, how do you consolidate some of your ideas? How do you do them? So waiting at the San Diego airport, and then all the flights, it just said delay. They all flipped at the same moment to delay. And there's all these people stuck. And we're like, what in the world? Because it's like 72 and sunny out. And it turns out that there was actually somebody in the landing path of these airplanes with a rifle that was like doing crazy things. And so they stopped appropriately, all the planes coming in, until they sorted that out. And so you can take a big, long thing, or you could just say sniper in the flight path. And so you could condense a much bigger idea to a sniper in the flight path. And you could see the people, they're not snipers. They're not actually shooting bullets at you. What they're doing is that they have opinions that are shooting your way. And so it's all stopped. So find a catchy, pithy, short way to describe a larger story.
So good.
Well, you guys, you've been listening to the Writing Room. And I hope that whether you are just toying with the idea of writing, or you're actually in the midst of it, that you'll take a couple ideas, mostly ones Kim had, and then put them into practice. Like, make this thing happen. Don't just leave it brain candy. So the next 5 minutes is the best 5 minutes. This is where you don't just agree. That would be swell. You say, so what am I going to do about that? Whether that's in your faith, in your writing, whatever, but just like make a move. All right, you guys, we'll talk to you again soon.